Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and it's time for the Comics Aficionados, the Saturday panel where we stream about all things comics. We got a great topic. We got a great panel for you this Saturday. Obviously, if you looked at the thumbnail, we're going to be talking about political correctness in comic books. Has it gone too far? Is there any coming back from it? And obviously, like I said, we have a great panel today. Joining us for the first time on the channel, I was just on his channel like 2-3 months ago, the Comic Book Hut. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. What's going on? How's everybody doing? Holla, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh,
you
great.
Want me to holla? I got it. Also joining us is friend of the channel. He's been a mentor for me since I started my channel. A good friend of mine. He's not only is he a YouTuber, he's a columnist, he's a comic book writer, and he plays one hell of a mean harmonica. Doug Ernst, how you doing?
Hey, man, thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words. I'm always happy to come back whenever you've got time for me.
Well, we've always got time for you, Doug, but I know you're always busy. You're finishing up the sequel to Soul Finder right now, right?
Yeah, Brett R. Smith is working on the last leg of the color work, and then we're heading off to the printer. I talked to the printer yesterday, and so he's going to come back to me in the very near future here, because I want to do something that hasn't been done before, that isn't just my mentor Timothy Lim. I've learned a lot from him, but I was like, you know what? I feel like I'm a little brother, and I'm just like, hey, what are you doing? Can I do that too? And I was like, I want to do something that like fits with the book, but it's also kind of different and unique at the same time. So we're gonna try and do something like that.
So you're taking the pre-order model that Tim's doing, but you're taking it to the next level, and you're Doug Ernstoning it. You're throwing a few little tweaks on it that more suit your style in your book.
Yeah, they could do stuff like Tim's last book had like a metallic sort of cover to it, and he's always trying to find ways to give more value to the customer. And so with this one, we're going to do a hardcover version of Matt's work as well, and we're going to do some stuff in terms of the printing quality that maybe is a little different, but not just being different for the sake of being different. So we'll see how it goes.
You need to add rabbits too.
Will there be a plush rabbit?
Whoop, rabbits.
Likely not. Also joining with, as always, is the retail expert, the curmudgeon of critical. Pele, how you doing?
Yeah, pretty good this morning actually. I'm all drugged up and got my infusion, and I feel like I'm 30 years old again for at least another day or two. So, not bad.
Wow, sounds wonderful. Obviously, last but not least is my co-host. We just finished recording This Week in X-Men. You'll see that here on the channel tomorrow. How you doing, Doc?
Oh, I'm last, and I definitely am least. No, it's I'm good this morning. Everybody. Looking forward to talking some comics, and it's too early to start drinking though.
Absolutely. Never. All right, Hut. Someone in the chat said that you're a troll. Are you going to troll us this whole thing, or are you here to talk about legitimate comic stuff?
I'm here to talk about legitimate comics. Just to sort of let people know, I'm very honest about what I say. And really, isn't that what we're talking about, is political correctness? And
you from New York?
Some people take issue with it when I talk about certain things on my channel, and it makes it seem like, well, at one moment he says this, and then the moment he says that. No, I'm very honest in the things I talk about, and some people have a difficult time with it. But I understand when people say that, but I'm not. I am a human being. I am a man, and I'm not a troll. But I do understand that comment. But
I thought you were the Hamburglar.
No, far from it.
The Comic Book Hut is a provocateur. It's part of your brain. But you also love comics. We used to talk about Green Lantern back in the day. We'll probably talk about that a little bit here today as well, because it's certainly come into this political correctness stuff that we're going to be talking about. I do want to send it to Doug first. Obviously, you've talked about this a lot, not only with your YouTube channel, but in your other professional life where you make your real money. And one character that you really love was inspiration for you. One of the reasons you joined the army. We talked about that as Captain America. That feels like one of those characters that should be kind of immune to the winds of the day. It's a timeless character who believes in patriotism, believes in the country. But even Captain America has fallen under political correctness nowadays.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is it just depends on the writer that you put on board. So if you put someone like a Ta-Nehisi Coates on a Captain America, when that decision was first announced, there was people that no, just give him a chance, and you're like, he writes for the Atlantic, and if for people that don't know, that's the magazine that recently had the anonymous sources that said, the president hates the military, yada yada yada, and this sort of stuff. So it's like it's sort of baked into the cake that you're going to have Captain America turn into a propaganda mouthpiece for somebody if you have a writer who that's their entire career is based on writing that sort of stuff.
If anybody wants to, they can go and look and see what the history of the Atlantic magazine is. I invite everyone to do so because it's a doozy. It really, really is. And if people are writing for that, then you have a pretty good indication that they're at least a socialist, if not an outright Marxist. So,
well, really, political correctness is kind of a means of speech control, thought control. Doc, I'm sure you remember when PC culture started coming in, it was all word policing, right? You're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say that. But, obviously it's expanded. Once these kind of things take hold in the fabric of a culture, they don't just sit there and like, well, now that we've weeded out the words that we don't like, now they've gone on to kind of thought policing and whatnot. And certainly it's not exclusive to comic books or nerd culture. This is going throughout the movie industry, TV, all facets of our society. It's in Dungeons and Dragons now.
Yep.
Even nerds that play table games in the comfort and privacy of their own home cannot escape political correctness.
Yeah, I mean, George Carlin absolutely put it best that political correctness is just fascism masquerading as politeness.
Yep.
And it's bullshit. Night was a cautionary tale, not an instruction manual. And so many of these weirdos these days want to make it into they look at it as an instruction manual. We've been seeing it. I guess it kind of started in the 80s, but it kind of took hold a lot in the early 90s. And then it started getting it had a very short lifespan when it came about in the early 90s. And it started getting lampooned really, really quickly. I mean, one of my favorite movies of all time came out of this, and it was PCU with Jon
Piven.
Favreau and Jeremy Piven and David Spade. It was goddamn hilarious, and it lampooned the shit out of the whole PC culture nonsense. And we don't have that anymore. Because even Hollywood back then, they took it seriously. They got on board with it too, but they were willing to laugh at it. Now it's just a bunch of humorless scolds.
Well, you know what really screwed them over back then when they tried to have PC politically correct culture take over is they went after rock and roll. And rock was not PC. Rock was very anti-PC, and Tipper Gore went after rock and roll.
Yep.
And hell no, she got slapped down. And the only thing that they got out of it was parental advisory labels. And
which makes you want to buy the album even more when we bought albums.
Yep.
Absolutely. So that's the only thing that the PC police got out of it. So, and everything else went just as normal. And Tipper Gore crawled underneath the couch again to hide. And but they're back, and they came back in force. So
Absolutely. It's strange, when you talk about George Carlin, you think like the one industry, the one group of people that would never subscribe to PC culture, word policing, thought policing, really would be like comedians. But
So
they've
they
kind of all
jumped
like
all
bought
on
it hook,
board.
line, and sinker too. Comic book head. Have you noticed that? Like people that you would never feel like would give into the mob would probably antagonize those people. Have really just bought into it. You think about who's the guy that did the Man Show?
Well, well, exactly. But you mentioned comedians. Jerry Seinfeld has said that he cannot really go to campuses anymore and
He
do his show,
refuses.
right? Because it's so PC that the audience will turn on him.
And he is so fucking milk toast as a
Absolutely.
comedian too.
Right.
Yeah,
You
I mean,
mentioned
that's the comedian my mom and dad listen to. They'll sit there and they'll put the, oh, look, it's that funny young man Jerry Seinfeld, and just
and you mentioned this sort of PC. It all comes from liberalism, to be honest with you. It started with, well, you can't say this and you can't say that. It gets you to the point where, and it's gotten to the point where you don't question things. Like, for instance, we've seen with the Democrats over the last week or so, they will not talk about what they're going to do if Biden becomes president. And people are like, well, why aren't you going to talk about it? They know that their own supporters won't question them. They won't question them and ask them, well, what are you going to do? They know that the whole thing, this whole PC thing, has led it to a point where people don't ask questions. And that's what that's really about. It's not just about you can't say this, you can't say that, but also you can't say, you can't ask your leaders what they're going to do. So there is sort of it leads into something, and that's where it's leading to be honest with you.
And I found that people that are generally pretty kind of stupid, if they're not funny, so the comedians or even comic book writers, they could use the PC culture as a crutch. If you don't have a funny joke, if you don't have a story that's any good, all you have to do is shoehorn the right politics, the right sort of catchphrases or talking points into the character's mouth or into your mouth if you're on stage, and just wait for the applause line. And so that's a way that they could sort of shield their own ability to churn out quality products.
Right. It kills the imagination, too. I mean, if you can't say certain things because you're going to offend maybe one person, say in New York City, not me, of course, but maybe somebody in Los Angeles, you think about this one person, then you're not going to be able to use the creativity that might lead to a better story.
Well,
so weird.
I mean, I feel like that's the same reason why they've pushed for this like post comedy thing where like comedy doesn't have to be funny anymore.
yeah. So
How is that comedy then? It's not even comedy anymore. It's
spoken word.
yes.
Basically.
I
Poetry.
feel like most of this is just an excuse to give Hannah Gadsby an actual paycheck. That's the only that's the only reason why Hannah Gadsby was probably hanging out with a bunch of comedians. Wasn't actually funny herself, but they're like, well, we like you and we'd like you to make money, so we'll go along with it. Because it's the only other way she's actually going to make any fucking money.
Yeah, she just stands there and is like, "Yo, white
Just yells
guys,
at people.
am I right?" And she just stands there and stares at people. It's like that's not comedy. What the?
I mean, all you have to do is go through Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers. All of these guys, they're technically late night comedians, but they don't really actually do comedy. They just make smarmy, sarcastic, smug remarks about people they disagree with politically, and then they turn to the audience, and even when it's the live audience, they get the clap sign that you don't see from your home, and then everybody claps. But then during the pandemic, you've seen that really kind of how awkward it is because they don't have the studio audience, and they'll tell these jokes that are just really mean comments masquerading as jokes, and without the audience there, you see how bitter and sort of angry that these people are, but not in a good way. They're not channeling any of their anger in towards something actually funny. It's just like, no, you're just an angry man.
Yeah,
You
I mean,
can just replace everything that they say with Orange Man bad. That's
it's there was a lot of comedy, especially the great comedy, came from places of deep kind of personal pain, and it was commentary on the world around them. It was finding the absurdity in an already absurd world. And it feels like none of these pampered assholes and personal pain is anymore. Like they don't have anything to fall back on, and it's the only reason any of these I feel like it's their way of staying relevant when they no longer are struggling to survive. Because even some of the greats, or they're not struggling with heavy drug addictions anymore. They're not struggling with an abusive past. They're not struggling to put food on the table because they're all getting signed to multi-million dollar deals and have been for decades, and now they're just essentially fat and lazy. But it's their only way of staying relevant when otherwise much more actual comedians, the ones that do have to fight for it, have to overcome things, would be blowing the doors off them because they're actually funny. They're actually finding observations in this world that amuse people, and it would put people like Jimmy Kimmel and Seth Meyers and whatever that all the weird Daily Show people or Daily Show adjacent people, it would put them all on the unemployment line because they'd actually have to keep competing.
You make a good point. We were talking about the Philippines before we were live, and to me, I just compare some of the places that I went earlier this year in the Philippines in terms of actual real poverty with some of these protesters who are saying, I'm oppressed and I'm poor and the United States keeps me down. And then suddenly they're, after their protest, they're going to the Starbucks if they haven't smashed in the window, and they're getting the Trenticized whatever coffee. And then after that, they're going to the Banana Republic and they're buying themselves a brand new outfit. Maybe they go to the Apple store if they haven't crushed that window, buy some new Apple stuff. And it's like, you're crying that you're oppressed. You don't know what real oppression is. You don't know what real poverty is. You don't even know what real struggle is in the United States. You live better than the kings of yore, and you're not even grateful for it. And so you just have these people that there's no sense of gratitude. There's no sense of humility. Maybe they've never even traveled outside the United States, and yet they're finger wagging everybody and their mother about, oh, woe is me. Whereas the old Marvel writers, they were literally like World War II veterans.
Yeah. And our athletes are the same way now.
Kind of, they haven't really experienced life. You can tell there's a lot of people that have very, definitive, like hard opinions on things that they've never experienced, like in their life ever. Like maybe you should get out there and kind of experience the world first before you have all these huge opinions about things you don't really know all that much about. Now, Doug, I do have this question from Eodius Lee, I believe. She's also in Asia as well. She's saying, when is politics too much in entertainment? When do you think it's gone too much with politics and entertainment?
So there's a way that, obviously you're going to be molded in many ways by the culture that you live in. You can't escape it. But it's when you're writing, you should always think about the characters first. And it used to be, we're just going to try and tell a really cool story, and maybe people could glean different lessons from it. You could view things from a political lens if you choose to do so. But the writers weren't going out saying, we need to browbeat someone and tell them what to think. It was, when you're doing writing well, for me anyway, it's you're covering these sort of broader philosophical issues, and you're presenting ideas to your audience for them to mull over. They could take it, they could turn it over in their hand, and oh, this is interesting. Let me see if I could unpack this. And when you're doing it wrong, you're basically using your ideas like a cudgel to beat someone over the head into submission and saying, if you don't believe what I believe, you're a bad person and I don't like you. And then if you complain, I'm going to say, well, you were never my audience anyway because you just don't understand. Get out of here. And so that's the attitude that I see a lot of the times today across entertainment.
Well, that attitude of you're not my audience, all that screams to me like the 20-something or 30-something or even sometimes 40-something version of I'm taking my ball and going home. Because you're just throwing a temper tantrum that you want other people to stop you throwing. You want people to beg you, oh no, please don't go. And the only correct way to deal with people like that is just by saying, fuck off, dude. We'll go get our own ball.
It's interesting. So a lot of times I'll say with entertainers, we're talking about comics specifically, but if you criticize a comic book writer and they're a minority, well, it's because I'm a minority. Or if you criticize their story and there's a minority character and it's because the character is minority, comic book, it almost feels like they use it, it's almost like plot armor. You can't have a real valid criticism about me because the only thing that you could be taking into consideration are all these surface traits about what's happening. It can't actually be about the quality of what I've presented to you. And it feels like they presented themselves as immune to criticism.
Well, the thing with them is that it's all about the message. Whatever that subversive message is that's going to break down what we're looking at right now, the breaking down of society. And if you put in, say, you change Captain America and he's now Sam Wilson, but the story is terrible, but there's a subversive message in it, the writer, the writer's being criticized, like was said earlier, it sort of protects them from any kind of criticism. So I say, well, you don't like the story because Captain America is black, Sam Wilson is black. But the reality is, even if you had a white character but with the same message, but it protects them, like I said. You mentioned all this sort of deflecting. Again, like I said earlier, it's all about the message. The difference between I've said this many times on my channel is that when you have art, and we're talking about comics, so it's art, it falls under art. Art was always a reflection of the society. When you've had these very unhealthy societies, some greater force, say government or whatever, will go to like the artist and say, we want to put out a message through your art. And that message becomes propaganda, and it tells the society, well, this is what the society is. Even though you have a different experience, whoever you are, the society clashes. And you're seeing this clash right now between Middle America and, say, the West Coast and the East Coast cultures. But the cultures from those different places are saying, no, this is how it is, and that's that. But the reality is not what we see. And that's where you see in this sort of, right now, this real clash between really two societies right now. But, you mentioned this sort of, all this stuff is just, it's very disheartening if you're like just looking at the whole like entertainment business, how they're fighting with the rest of the country. You see this in sports, and you see this in obviously entertainment, TV, Hollywood, and down the line. And I would mention also that you sort of seen a lot of this major turn once Disney took over Marvel, and you had really big money going into pumping in stuff into all these different ideas into Marvel. But that, I mean, really, they create all these different like politically correct characters primarily to get their message out. I said this on my own channel that when you break down the hero, what do you have to look at? Where do you go for help in that situation? So say there is no Superman. You have Superman with Brian Michael Bendis. He's crying in the books. He can't like solve any problems. And there are other characters like Supergirl solving problems, or Lois Lane solving problems. But meanwhile, the book is about Superman. Where do you go as an individual for help? And that's where this whole idea, well, I can't rely on the hero. I got to go somewhere else for help. And a lot of people need help, just as a sort of as an idea as a help. But and where do they go at the end of the day? They'll go to a government, politician or whatnot.
So you brought up something really interesting. It kind of reminded me of actually a video Doug did not too long ago. Actually, it might have been a couple of years ago. It was like the death of beauty, where the culture does reflect, or the art does reflect the culture. Where think about back in the day, the buildings and the architecture, just in America, 100 years ago compared to what we do today. Think about the music that we made compared to today. Think about the artwork that was created. Think about Europe and all the architecture, and look at what it is today. It's almost like the culture itself wants everything to be ugly and bland, nothing to ever stand out. People are ashamed for being attractive nowadays. It's the weirdest thing. They will actually go out of their way to make themselves as visually unappealing as possible, because that's what a culture like. They don't want anyone to stand out. It's not fair if you're good at something and I'm not, because that's a reflection on me. It's not a reflection on you and your ability. You know what I'm saying, Doug?
Right. The one thing that, just to go back to the founding of our country, and particularly the architecture, George Washington designed Washington, D.C. And a lot of the architecture, if you notice, it goes back to, it's all designed based off the Romans. And the Romans had these big monuments to the gods, and the founding fathers wanted to be like the Romans and wanted to be like the Greeks. Well, the best parts of it in terms of government and just as a society. We look back and we study art. We have the Romans and we have the Greeks. If you look at their artwork, they're very similar, but they're also very different. If you look at the Greeks, when they did these sculptures of all these gods and all these people that lived during their time, they were idealized. Now, the Romans come down the line 1,000 years later, or whatever it is, and they start doing these sculptures of politicians and everyday people, and they look like regular people. So you see this sort of reflection of what they thought is the ideal in their society. And today, what do we see today? But we see the opposite now. We don't say, for instance, the heroic person. We sort of castigate the police, even though 20 years ago they were all heroes here in New York City. Now they're castigated as villains because the culture says so. Usually, but 20 years ago, the society said the police were the heroic figure. I have a friend. His father is a police officer. It's actually kind of an amusing story, but it's not. He was doing his work in a mental institution for quite a long time, and he begged for a transfer from his commanding officers for many, many years. He finally got himself a transfer, and it was in a park. The second day was 9/11. The park that he was in was Battery City Park, and he was the first responder down there. 20 years ago, he was looked upon, and he came home. Thank God he came home. But he was considered a hero 20 years ago. He's one of the first people down to ground zero. Now he's looked upon as a villain in this city because of the mayor and because of politicians like Joe Biden and all these different people. And but that's kind of what's going on here now. As you see, 20 years ago, the society said that my friend's father was a hero. Now he's looked as a villain because the culture says no. But go ahead.
No, I was going to go back to the issue of, I know Doug's talked about it in the past, beauty and art in general, and we've brought up architecture a couple of times, and you can kind of juxtapose the Western individual. There's a lot of individualism in great architecture. It's unique. It stands out from one way or another, but you look at essentially what you would consider like Marxist architecture, and it's all brutalism. Yeah. It's simple, and cold and uniform. Yeah, and so nothing stands out. Sorry, I just felt the need to point that out.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we talk about all this stuff, and that's what they want to do. I think they've mentioned with the Green New Deal, that they want to tear all the buildings down in our country and make them basically the same. If you live at one place, say in Tennessee to be the same place as in New York City. And that's kind of what they want. They want everything to be uniform. They don't want anything to be different. They all talk about diversity, but the reality is, as long as you think the same, it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside, and everything else will be the same, But that's the one thing about architecture. And I know it's not what we're talking about, but just now I should go back to that anyway. But talking about these different characters that on the outside they look different, but really they all espouse the same philosophy. And they're very intolerant. Even when they're written, they're very intolerant of the audience, very intolerant of other characters in these books. You mentioned the X-Men. I'd gotten this X of Swords, the first issue. I could not believe that the villains tell the heroes what to do in that book. I was shocked. Very
well,
surprised.
That's what we've been talking about as far as
right.
That we don't know whether or not that the X-Men are influenced, as far as the Krakoa and that's kind of the plot of what's going on, and
right.
But how much of that though is just the attitudes changed among writers? So.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, Doug, I kind of want to bring it back to comics. So just thinking about what we were talking about, the death of beauty in America. Recently, there's I think it just came out maybe this week or next week, but there's this Wonder Woman 1984 special cover, or I think Rooster Teeth did like a special cover, and it's Wonder Woman.
Oh, yeah, I know which cover you're talking about.
She's very full-figured. It does not appear to be the character that anyone, she obviously looks like someone cosplaying as Wonder Woman, but essentially that piece of artwork is beyond criticism, because if you criticize it, it's because you hate fat people or you don't like a diversity within Wonder Woman. It's like, well, it might just be that I like Wonder Woman, or I like the beautiful idealized version of Wonder Woman. Where do you think, why do you think we're not allowed to say that's not what we want? And why won't they listen to us?
Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of moral relativism. People that don't believe that there is any objective truth doesn't exist, objective beauty doesn't exist, everything's in the eye of the beholder, and doing that in a way where you could essentially tear down standards. There are no standards. We're all an island unto ourselves, and whatever I believe, you make yourself into your own god. So if you think obesity is beautiful, then obesity is beautiful. Or if you think scribbles on the page are beautiful, then scribbles on the page are beautiful. And so again, it's one of these things where you're just flatlining essentially, and when it comes to quality artwork, quality writing, everything, so everybody can be exactly the same. So that Wonder Woman cover is a great example of that. You see that in the sculptures that you get today, these just hideous things that show up a lot of times in Europe. You'll see they unveil some sculpture and it's just like this thing, you're like, that's really gross. It looks like someone who had never even taken a sculpting class did that. And so you just see it's more prevalent all over the place. And if you actually, this is somewhat related. I don't know if you saw the trailer for that new MODOK show yesterday that Marvel's coming out with. It's like the stop motion animation with Patton Oswalt involved in it. That's another instance where everything is a joke. When it comes to anything heroic, anything talking about virtues or principle, it's there's a place for that sort of silly humor. But at the same time, when everything is just silly, the heroes mean nothing. And it's like they just want to tear down everything heroic.
Did you happen to see that statue of Medusa? That's like a new thing here in New York City. It was someone had done a new statue of Medusa with the head of Perseus, which is not what happened in the mythology.
Yeah. Doesn't make any sense. He should have been stone. I don't know how she cut his head off unless she cut him, slice it off from the back. But kind of getting back to comic books. Obviously, I spoke earlier. We're both big fans of the Green Lantern.
Right.
Now, Green Lantern is think about diversity. Yeah. It's you have alien lanterns from all over the galaxy. You got thousands of sectors to patrol. But now there's 15 human lanterns because there's you got to have an Asian lantern, you got to have a Latino lantern, you got to have a Middle Eastern lantern, you got to have a black. It's beyond ridiculous. It doesn't even make sense within the Green Lantern Corps, but you have to, you know what I'm saying?
It's so strange. I mean, every other planet has its own protector, except for the Earth.
It was like 15.
Yeah, there's 15 of them. Now, some of them are really great. I mean, John Stewart is great, Guy Gardner, and Hal Jordan, but the rest of them, ugh. That's just
it doesn't make any sense at all.
It just waters down the whole idea of what that character's supposed to be.
They're like breaking rules. Like one girl stole the lantern power using a gauntlet, and I believe the one was the Asian lantern was like gifted his lantern from his grandma who used to be a Green Lantern. Obviously, that's not how you receive a Green Lantern ring, but they just change all the rules.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just to break down the hero, like Mr. Ernst said earlier. It's all about breaking down the hero, and there's no beauty in it. And and I mentioned this too, is that not everyone is special. To be honest with you, so not everybody
characters.
Not everybody. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, specifically with Green Lantern, there's characters that are Green Lanterns that have no will of their own. Hardly, they have no willpower. Yeah. But they've somehow gotten a ring now, and but they're going to come into their power, and they're going to become, and they haven't. Nothing's changed about them. They're the same flat, two-dimensional, stupid character they were when they were introduced.
I was talking about this the other day, the Spider-Verse, the Into the Spider-Verse movie that came out that a lot of people like. But originally, when the Spider-Verse was created by Dan Slott, he was saying that they're the only quote-unquote real Peter Parker, or the real Spider-Man, is the one that you like the most. And so there could be an infinite amount of Spider-Men out there, but it's another instance where these writers and the artists, they're always trying to essentially tear down the old, to deconstruct it, to do away with it, and make it so that nothing is special. Like you said, you could have all these Green Lanterns, and there's going to be 100 Green Lanterns from Earth, and you're just supposed to be like, yeah, they're all the same or whatever. There's going to be 100 different Spider-Men, and Peter Parker is just not special anymore. And I don't know, there's always this sort of subversive thing about tearing down what was great and what made Marvel Comics in particular, and I guess DC, iconic to begin with.
Yeah, it's been pretty troubling. Doug, when did you first started noticing PC culture actually start creeping into comic books themselves? Was it with Spider-Man? I know you've been reading that character, since you were a child. Or was it other characters where it kind of came in first?
Yeah, I know the Comic Book Hut has actually done some really good work on this. So I'm limited because I've always said, listen, I read Iron Man, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Captain America, and outside of that, I will usually make a fool out of myself if I start talking about a Green Lantern. And so my experiences were definitely with Spider-Man, and then on social media. Social media, I think, poisoned and warped people's minds because they realized they could get popular by saying outlandish things, doing outlandish things, particularly if you're political. If you're the meaner that you are against political opponents, the more popular you can be. And so I think social media and sort of these, actually the late night television guys and the Jon Stewarts, where they started sort of making it, the litmus test for being cool was just how rabidly political you were. And I think that started, I don't know, we'll say it started maybe in the early 2000s. And then I really started looking into it around 2009, 2010.
I noticed it because I was a big fan of the Savage Dragon. And I noticed when Eric Larson put President Obama's face on the cover of one of his books, I was like, uh-oh. Why would he do that when that book was not political at all? And I also noticed it with Captain America once they had killed him off at the end of Civil War. And then they brought in Bucky. Now, Bucky was okay, as Captain America. But then when they brought Captain America back, he didn't become Captain America. He went to go work for the president as a separate character from from what was going on. He sort of like running errands and giving out assignments, and he wasn't doing anything heroic. And that's when I really noticed it. And then at that point, I kind of bowed out of comics for quite a few years. And then when I came back in 2014, 2015, I noticed very much in 2016 how politically charged the books had gotten. I was very surprised by it. I mean, there was always politics in there, but it was always sort of, the writers always let the audience decide what the deal was. They let, now it's like it's one side and that's it. Well, that's when I really noticed it was around 2007, 2008.
It was
Doc, obviously, Doc, you are the X-Men historian. Yep. X-Men is obviously had a lot of, they're stand-in for minorities, whether you're, black, gay, whatever. If you're an outcast, the X-Men kind of represent who you are. Now, normally, when it first started, X-Men, yes, there was prejudice against them. They're fighting against them, but mostly it was a team book with team interpersonal dynamics and conflict, but they were going out and saving people. And then what was the book? God Loves Man Kills comes in. It was a graphic novel. And then at what point did X-Men solely become about oppression?
I would say sometime during the Fraction run, when Fraction and Brubaker were kind of co-writing, and then Fraction kind of took over. That's when it basically became solely about that. They would have moments of it not being like that, but when they moved them to San Francisco, and I would say that's kind of where the line got crossed, where it never really got crossed back. There was a little bit of it whenever they finally put God Loves Man Kills into continuity, around the time when Claremont was writing Extreme X-Men, and he did a sequel to God Loves Man Kills in the pages of Extreme X-Men. Because up until that point, it was an out-of-continuity story. But bringing it into continuity and making it, part of it, that was kind of where the line got crossed. They would have moments of it coming backwards, but for the most part, it kind of ceased being the globe-trotting soap opera mutant stuff and started being just about oppression. And it's not surprising with Fraction running it. I mean, him and his wife, that's the only thing they ever write about. No, so I would say, I guess that would have been around issue 500. So maybe around 2000, what would that have been? 2008, 2009. Yeah, that's about where
it's so boring. I mean, how many times can we see freaking Kitty Pryde or Jean Grey go in front of the UN and condemn the world?
Yeah, exactly. It becomes very tiresome.
It becomes a meme at a certain point. It's like, oh yeah, there's the little girl standing in front of the bull again, with her hands on her hips.
Yeah, there was always elements of it, but it was always in the background, and from time to time it would boil over.
Yeah, it's part of the fabric of X-Men, but it wasn't the focus.
It wasn't, and it was around the time that Fraction got on there and moved the team to San Francisco, and then it became nothing but Oppression Olympics for the rest. I mean, it's the reason why Hickman kind of calls it the lost decade.
Yeah,
because
I'm glad you brought up Fraction. I hadn't planned on talking about this, but he's a huge creator as far as PC bringing it into Marvel Comics. He's destroyed a lot of characters. Just think about what he did to Hawkeye.
Think about what he did to Hawkeye. Think about what he did to Iron Man.
Yep.
Jesus.
Iron Man still isn't right.
He completely feminized Iron Man.
Yeah, I mean, he destroyed Iron Man. He destroyed Hawkeye. In my opinion, he was, Morrison's X-Men had a lot of that same oppression themes, but it wasn't as I mean, I guess they were kind of pretty on the surface, but Fraction definitely ramped it up to 11. So yeah, he has ruined more Marvel characters than even Bendis.
Wow.
It really is. We should do a whole video on Fraction and all the characters. I wouldn't even call it deconstruction. It's just character
Demolition.
sabotage, assassination. Yeah, he just destroys characters because he's always got to incorporate his personal beliefs into the character. He can't put it around the character, or you can't have the character confront that. It always has to be that's what the character becomes. And if they can't, then he just replaces them and makes them look like they're pathetic.
Well, I apologize if I'm in the minority here. I should have checked to see if your reviews, even the new Iron Man, the relaunch that just came out. I kind of hated it. I was like, you know what? I kind of noped out on Dan Slott's Iron Man after a while because I was just so ticked off with it. And then it was supposed to be this back to basics sort of thing. And Tony Stark is just going around being like, woe is me. Like he's lost. He doesn't know.
I need to give up my money. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he ends up getting like a car from the 1970s, but it just feels like this
midlife crisis.
Yeah. Midlife crisis, funeral dirge. And he like literally, I might do a video on it. It's like this Derek Zoolander. There's that scene where he's like, who am I? And it's like, that's how it felt. And I was like, what is going on? Like these guys, this is emblematic of Marvel as a whole, where they're just burnt out. They don't know what to do with the characters. And when they're not doing the weirdly hyper political thing, they have the characters just lost and confused. And it's because I just think they don't even know what to do with the characters these days.
Well, I think a lot of these writers weren't really like comic book fans. I think a lot of them are from Hollywood, or they're failed screenwriters, and they're just they watch the movies. They've seen Robert Downey act as Tony Stark, and they think that's how Tony was all those years. On my channel, I've said that that Tony, in my view, he was never an A-list hero. He's always sort of a B-list hero. He had his own book. People liked him, but he wasn't like on the level of on the level of Spider-Man, in my view. So I think a lot of them just do things based off of these movies now.
Honestly, there was only three total books at Marvel that I would legitimately call A-list.
Right.
Spider-Man, Wolverine, X-Men. That's it. Avengers was a B-list title. Fantastic Four, since the 60s, maybe the early 70s, was a B-list title. Captain America, still a B-list title. I mean, everybody knows who they are, but they don't sell. They would be good enough that would stick around for you'd get a couple hundred issues, but they'd always be middling in sales. They'd never be near the top unless there was some huge something or other like Heroes Reborn.
Right.
But Marvel has Wolverine, Spider-Man, and the X-Men. That's their A-list. Everything below that is B or below. Because if everybody's A-list, nobody's A-list.
Yeah, it's weird. Like Doug was just talking about the new Iron Man. It's back to basics. He gives a bunch of his money away. He's all kind of mopey. He's on social media and everybody hates him. He's all sad faced, and every time he tries to do something good, it blows up in his face. And you get the same thing actually happen kind of with Batman. Like Tom King's Batman is completely ineffective. He's no longer he's letting Joker murder people in front of him with no repercussions. He's all mopey because his girlfriend left him. And then in James Tynion's current Batman, like I don't think he feels comfortable writing a billionaire. So he's I got to take all his money. What is it? Doug, what is it that these guys hate so much about money?
Yeah, that's another thing where the worldview, sinks into it. They have to write a hero, and if you were a good writer, a creative guy, you would do. Actually, I think it was Stan Lee basically was talking about that the start of Iron Man was like, I want to find a way to actually make a billionaire a hero, where people, you're used to dumping on billionaires and talking about wealth inequalities or whatnot. But to me, an Elon Musk, I mean, if you can't find the positive in someone like an Elon Musk, who's in many ways like a Tony Stark, like maybe you shouldn't be a writer. And some of it is with these guys, they don't want to do the research. I've said before, Dan Slott, when he writes Billionaires, it's like the guy's never taken a business 101 class. He's never taken an accounting class in his life. And
he doesn't even know what econ is.
Yeah. So when he was writing Billionaire Peter Parker, Peter was just giving money out like it's just growing on trees. Like everywhere he would go, he would just like give out hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. Like that's just what billionaires are supposed to do. And you're just like, okay, well, there's one thing to be philanthropic, but you're just acting like money comes out of nowhere to them. And so I think it's a combination of both. Yeah, the worldview where they're literally not capitalists. They're oftentimes socialists. Go to their social media feed, or they're just lazy writers and they don't want to look into. They can't read a book on whether it's a Tony Robbins or it's a Elon Musk, or take your pick of. You could even go back to the early days of some of the great entrepreneurs in U.S. American history. If you don't like the modern guys, go to the classics, the guys who saved the United States during World War II by turning factories, that were making cars. Suddenly they were making tanks and Jeeps for the front lines, those sorts of things.
Remember with the one guy that had the factory, he was going to make a bunch of masks because there was a mask shortage in the U.S. and like all of the media just made fun of him because
the My Pillow guy.
Yeah,
Mike Lindell.
It's so strange.
Well,
That guy is I've seen all kinds of interviews with him. He is like a real salt of the earth, decent, humble guy. He's amazing. He's amazing role model for people to follow if they want to get into business, or if they just want somebody that's a modern day wealthy individual that has a moral code, and they've turned him into a villain.
Well, on the issue, I mean, this isn't about Mike Lindell or pillows, but on the idea of, there's one time I've read somebody that actually seemed to understand like the business, and if you want a great comic about somebody using billions to actually solve problems, I mean, other than Batman, obviously, he gets all his cool toys. But if you ever have the opportunity, Wildcats Volume 2 and Wildcats version 3.0 are absolutely fantastic. It's
written by noted socialist
Joe Casey.
Oh, that isn't Warren Ellis. Okay.
No, this was written by Joe Casey.
Okay.
And the first like 6 or 7 issues were written by Volume 2 were written by Scott Lobdell, but all of the rest of Volume 2 and all of version 3.0 were written by Joe Casey. And if you see Joe Casey's name on a comic, you're more than likely going to be happy with it. Mm-hmm. He's a great writer, but he wrote you guys remember Wildcats, right? The Jim Lee comic that was kind of like a bunch of X-Men clones from the early 90s. It was one of the Image launch titles. Well, after 50 issues of that, they kind of evolved it, and Volume 2 was about Spartan, the guy that looked like the not Cyclops, basically taking over the Halo Corporation, which was kind of their financing, their whatever their the way that they're able to have all their cool toys like Batman and the X-Men, except for he decided to use the Halo Corporation as a superhero. And it is one of the best it involves basically what would happen if a corporation decided, if they managed to find a parallel universe that matter and energy are reversed, where everything is made up of energy and matter powers the energy. So you basically have an unlimited supply of energy. They managed to make batteries, cars. Imagine how much you can improve the world by using some of that technology. It's like the complaints about the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four got to a point where they have so much crazy technology, but they never really used it to improve the
All right,
world.
Doc, I'm gonna have to go down. I gotta take a break here soon, so I gotta reintroduce the topic, and I have to go to the bathroom. So, Hut, have you been reading Daredevil?
I've read the annual that they put out about a month ago.
That was a very good issue. So I've loved Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky. It's probably the best comic in all the industry, but this last issue was really puzzling. And actually, I ended up losing kind of a friend over this one. This person had been on my channel. They have a YouTube channel. And when I put out a message about this, I put out some commentary about this issue. They actually blocked me. I guess we're not friends anymore because at the very end of it, at the end of this issue of Daredevil, they've been having problems within in Hell's Kitchen. People might lose their houses or whatever. And Daredevil and Iron Man are having a talk. And Daredevil tells Iron Man, "You're going to take your billions of dollars. You're going to buy all the real estate in Hell's Kitchen, and then you're going to rent it to all the tenants that are currently there for basically next to nothing." And Iron Man's like, "You want me to lose billions of dollars on a real estate deal?" He goes, "Yes, because it's the right thing to do." And I put out a message in social media. I was like, "I'm about tired of all these comic writers wanting to give everyone money away. I find it frustrating." I actually lost somebody that had been on the channel multiple times. I thought we were friends because I said that. It's just so weird the way that they project. Like, Daredevil was a lawyer. He was the mayor of New York. He knows that you can't have the billionaire giving all of his money away. Who he produces jobs and keeps the economy rolling and stupid like that. You don't just give money away.
Nope.
No, billions, I mean, well, this is the first time I'm hearing this. That's crazy.
Well, people, you get to a point with certain people on the radical side, they don't understand how wealth is made. They don't understand how wealth is kept, and they sure as hell don't want anything to do with the people who do know those things. So they just think, like somebody said earlier, that it grows on trees. They don't understand the reality of charitable contributions. We do a lot of charity stuff, and my wife and I. And the reality is, you have $1 million and you want to give money to charity, you give that $1 million away, and it's gone. I mean, what you put it into somebody else's hands, and they're going to be asking for more money tomorrow. Because there's an endless hole in which to fill as far as need. There's a lot of need out there. What you do, the intelligent thing though that you do is you set up a trust, and you invest that money, and you have that $1 billion, earning interest, and you give that interest away, or you roll part of that interest over, and then you have, the ability to help multi-generations of people, millions and millions and millions of dollars over a span of 40, 50 years, rather than I just gave $1 million away. Yay, look, I'm great. And
the thing about that story that Wes was telling me is that if that is a kind of a thing that happens in reality, if the people that are living in Hell's Kitchen, what incentive do they have to get out of Hell's Kitchen in that situation?
What incentive do they have to do anything positive with their lives?
Exactly.
Well, I'd actually like to concentrate on the person who blocked Wes over saying that, because I got to be careful how I say it. I'll be careful, Wes, if you're back now. But there was somebody in the chat room earlier who was kind of very angry at this particular panel and talking about how it's not, diverse enough in terms of the ideas being shared here. But I've found that I've always been open to talking to people that disagree with me politically on these issues, but they keep blocking me over and over and over and over again. So the reason why you might get a panel like this is because people keep blocking Wes when he mentions that maybe Tony Stark shouldn't be giving billions of dollars away when he can't just do the thing like you're talking about. You take some from the interest, and then over the course of decades, you could give people $100 million instead of $1 million. And so to me, it's like, no, I'm perfectly capable talking to someone who has very sharp disagreements with me, but they keep blocking me when I've done nothing but try to be tactful to them.
Well,
they don't want to talk. And go ahead, Doc.
I was going to say socialists don't understand money, so whenever you start explaining it to them, they don't like realizing how dumb they are, or how not dumb, ignorant. How ignorant they are on the subject of money. And so they just basically throw a temper tantrum and block people. It's sad.
That sucks. That's stupid. You're stupid, and then they just sort of stomp off somewhere and pout, and God.
I wish the guy who was here earlier, did he delete all of his comments too, or was, I don't know. There was a guy earlier, he was just really mad and he's talking about Wes. So if he's still around, I want to be like, boom, that guy who blocked Wes, who was literally on the show, who disagreed over, some petty disagreement over politics. He could have been on the panel today, but he chose to to burn that bridge with Wes over what? A Daredevil Iron Man conversation. That's weird.
Well, what I found is, I have these conversations. It's one of the reasons why I had to finally ban political discussion at the comic shop, because people wanted to get into debates of capitalism, talk about the evils of capitalism or capitalism versus socialism and whatnot. And they would get so furious that I just, that I would counter them and explain to them, okay, this is capitalism matters. I'd give them breakdowns. There's 8% of the world population's in poverty now. It was 85% 100 years ago, and the main reason for that is capitalism. And and explain how that happened. Explain to them how charitable situations, how you keep something like that progressing, and how wealth taxes are antithetical to actually reversing poverty. And they just get mad. They get mad, throw a tantrum. I'm never coming back, and they leave. It's okay, fine. It wasn't worth having those conversations anymore because, just lose customers. And not that I really need them as customers, but I don't want somebody to just get mad and get pissy and stomp off. It's not a good idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as, we don't want to be Kelly Sue.
Yeah.
We if you don't like my books, don't buy my books.
Exactly.
Whatever nonsense it is. Going down that road is it never helps anything.
No.
Yeah, there's someone in the chat right now who just says, quote, I recently got blocked by both Heather Antos and Mags Visaggio on Twitter, and I have never personally interacted with them and even defended Mags on Twitter. Yes, I get along with the wrong people. And so, yes, I am in the same club as you, Jamie, who's commenting. And so that's another one of these things where Mags used to, years ago, actually DM me about these sorts of topics about the comic book industry, and would basically say like, oh, well, you're different than the others. You're tactful and this and that and the other thing. And I was like, okay, well, if you could interact with me, like, I don't understand why you can't find other people to interact with as well. And then I was blocked. And so Heather Antos has had me blocked for a long time, but it's like, again, these people, they just use giant blockchains and cut off literally thousands, if not tens of thousands of customers at a time who they've never interacted with. Why? Because guilt by association, you happen to follow someone who they disagree with, and they pull a different lever on election day.
I will admit that I do block people online, but a lot of times when people write to me, it's always like so they just want to argue forever. Yeah. But I will say, I have put out invitations to people that have a different political philosophy than I do to come on my channel, and they just will not get back to me.
Yeah,
So
if somebody comes to me on Twitter and they want to have an honest discussion, that's fine.
Right.
But when they just come out with knives out and they're ready to, they're just stabby. They don't care about the pursuit of information or the mutual pursuit of knowledge. They just want to get their zinger in. They just want to
Right.
insult you. They just want to say something nasty, and I just won't give them the satisfaction. So,
like if people,
so I
'cause
will block people. Usually I mute them, but
I'm trying to like prove a point on what I do is customers are, because I consider myself a customer advocate, and people come to me, especially creators, they want to like argue with me. So I block a lot of them because trying to prove a point. Don't argue with somebody that is willing to give you money. There's no point in doing that. And if you're in any kind of like retail business or you're working with customers every day, the worst thing you could do is start an argument with the customer, because then they'll leave forever. They'll leave forever. Now, I'm trying to prove a point by blocking some of them, but some of them don't understand that. But there are some creators that'll come to me and say, can we talk? And I do talk to some. And I will point out, I do talk to a lot of liberal people, not as much as I had, but I do talk to them. And it's always been very respectful. It's always been there's a lot of kindness there. But if you come at me specifically and start complaining about, well, you did this and you did that, as a person that's trying to sell anything, you're going to have to, be honest with you, you're going to have to sort of deal with it and just let it roll off your back,
Yeah.
And some of them just don't understand that. I mean, I come from a different perspective, obviously, because of what I'm trying to do. But, I don't think a lot of people understand that.
Well, when it comes to the blocking thing, I mean, it's the same thing as their writing. I mean, their writing kind of demonstrates their overall worldview.
Yeah.
You get people like Slot and them that write like, billionaires, like money just grows on trees. And they also treat the comic industry, at least the fans, the same way. Like fans and their money grows on trees. Like it's going to come in regardless of how they treat them. So I will treat them poorly, but they don't recognize that that's not the way it works.
Well,
It's not the way it works in business, and it's not the way it works in actual business.
Nope. The reason why these writers never mature beyond a certain point, and I'm talking about the writing style maturity, I'm talking about the quality of their work never improves, is because the only people that get through their blockade of blocks are the people who kissed their asses. They're the people that suck up to them, the people that agree with them no matter what they do, no matter what they say. They're going to get agreement, they're going to get applause. They're going to get all these people that are lined up to suck their butt. And all the people who would have
that's
criticism.
That's how you get a parasite.
It is actually. But those people are blocked out, they're not heard. So you don't get that criticism, and you don't know that your stuff is bad. You don't know anything because all you have are people just sucking up to you, and it never improves. And it's like this, pardon the mental image, but you have this human centipede of people that are writing comics right now, and there's like one of them gets good information in. But by the time it gets to the tail end of the centipede, what is it turned into? And
parasites.
Yes.
That's how you get parasites.
So, fellas, I do want to say, if this is your first time visiting Thinking Critical YouTube, so you can hear what Doug and Comic Book Hut have to say, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy this. Let everyone know that we're having a good, honest conversation here. I think we're having a great time. Now, kind of bringing it back into comic books and political correctness, Moon Knight here makes a good point, Doug. He says, in my opinion, politics can't be totally avoided in comics, and I don't think they should be. I personally like social commentary in my entertainment. It's when we reach the level of propaganda and things like that where you're not allowing the consumer to make a choice. Give me information, let me make a choice. It's when you're trying to tell me how to think or how to feel that I take offense, and I think it's been taken too far. You mentioned Immortal Hulk, like the very first issue. There's like an anti-gun thing in there. Whatever, I can ignore that, but eventually Al Ewing kind of got away with it a few times. He just kept putting it too much into his story. It became annoying, and I dropped the series. Like, Doug, do you think politics should just be avoided at all costs within comic books and entertainment?
No, like we were saying earlier, there's no way that if you've been marinating in your own culture, whatever you write, if you write any sort of multi-layered story, it's going to be able to be viewed through a political lens. There's going to be things that are political that you might not even kind of realize that were more political than general. But if you're going at it from story first, entertaining first, then the politics is an underlying factor. But also, I found that bad writers, so what they do is they'll basically take their ideology and they treat it with utter seriousness. If you disagree with their ideology, you get a funhouse mirror circus freak show version of the opposing ideology. But if you're a good writer, what you would do, so I'm a conservative man. What I would do if I'm writing liberal characters is I take liberalism incredibly seriously, and I try and maximize the argument, or just take it. You're not making a joke out of it. You're not making some sort of weird parody, again, funhouse mirror version of it, because when you do that, that's when it gets silly. And if you take both sides seriously, then you get really, really good writing at times.
Well,
yeah, you think about Alan Moore's Watchmen. Well, you're not supposed to really like Rorschach. But he presented Rorschach in his view on life. He gave him an origin story, and you saw his perspective. Now, you could agree with Rorschach or not. Of course, in the end, I obviously did, because I thought he was the only one with principles and never bent them. You know what I mean?
The other example of that is being Nick Spencer, and then putting all of your ideas into the mouth of Captain America, and then all of the opposing views, every commentary, everything that is a criticism of your views, you only put it in the mouths of, like, the Serpent Society and the fucking Red Skull. I mean, when you're putting, like, what was ostensibly perfectly rational, normal, like 5 years ago, middle, baseline conservative arguments, and you're shoving them only into the mouth of an actual goddamn Nazi. It becomes absurd. It's legitimately absurd. You're like, I can't take you seriously as a writer, and therefore I can't take Captain America seriously as a character as long as you're writing him.
Also, when a writer has someone that's been critical of them and then takes that character, puts them in as a Nazi into his comic book. What did you think about that?
I could speak from experience on that one. So for people that don't know, I was criticizing Max Bemis's lack of professionalism a couple years ago. Well, I want to say late 2017, early 2018. And then roughly 6 months later, there was a Ernst, quote unquote, Nazi who was tormenting and torturing Moon Knight. And so, that's another instance where it's like, oh, they watch your, you do 4 or 5 videos sort of telling this guy, like, hey, maybe it's a good idea not to tell the fans and the readers and the customers that you, quote, effing hate them. Maybe it's a good idea not to tell them, if you disagree with me, what was it? You could feast upon my butt. I cleaned it up a little bit there. Yeah. And then 6 months later, after he's openly saying that he uses his own personal life to untangle his problems in the comic books, then all of a sudden there's an Ernst villain in there with, like, no first name. It's just Ernst. So it's like, okay, interesting coincidence there.
Yeah. When you're obviously that petty, when you can't defend your own position, and the only way that you can make your whatever point you're trying to make is by sticking the reasonable criticisms of your opinion in the mouth of actual Nazis and villains, like horrible, horrible genocidal villains. You know you have a problem. I mean, it's the
But it
reason.
also speaks to the professionalism, not only of the writer, but the editorial staff and just Marvel in general, that they even let it go through.
Exactly. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed the way that like Claremont made Magneto less of a villain over time, because then that, like, instead of him being like this arch super villain, that just wanted to destroy everything, he made him a legitimate counter to Xavier's worldview in a way that made you actually think about the two sides of the argument and whether or not Magneto was right or Xavier was right. But modern creators, they don't have the talent to do that, and they're not secure enough in their own beliefs that the only way that they can take a shot at the other side is by sticking reasonable criticisms in the mouths of actual genocidal maniacs.
Mm-hmm.
So, Hut, one of the things I've noticed with villains, and this has been going on for a while, is like villains aren't villains anymore. They all have a very sympathetic backstory, and even if what they're doing is wrong, you're supposed to understand it. Like this whole moral relativism, to where whether a person's a villain or not is in the eye of the beholder. That really irks me. Is that something that you've noticed too in comics?
I've noticed it, but it depends on who writes it. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. But you sort of have to sort of explain how a villain gets to be a villain sometimes, especially if it's a reoccurring villain. I had asked the creators of Black Ops, Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini, is it important to write a villain that has a backstory? They didn't necessarily believe that to be so. I mean, there are people out there that are just chaotic, and it doesn't matter what they're about and stuff. I guess that's why people love the Joker so much, because there really isn't like any kind of like tragedy to him. He's just there. He's just a chaotic character. And then you have other characters that have a bit of a background to it. So I guess it's just one of those things that it's sort of a murky area, It's really about it's what the audience likes, I think, a lot of times with that.
But did you see Infinity War?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Like Thanos is the villain, but really he's the protagonist.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to end half the life in the universe because I want to end hunger and suffering across the galaxy. And nobody in that comic book ever challenges him on that thought process. None of the heroes ever say that's wrong and that's why I have to stop you. I think the only one that I can think of, actually, it's only one line, is Doctor Strange. But for the most part, he's presented as exceptionally sympathetic, and like I said, he's essentially like the protagonist. Don't you like Doug? Like you see that, right? Isn't it so weird that somebody that wants to kill half a life is the good guy?
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I guess his world was destroyed, and he just wanted to make it the way he wanted it. But isn't that kind of like what a dictator is? Just sort of breaking everybody to bend to his will. It is strange with the way they create some of these characters. But like I said earlier, when you have these different villains that are it's just weird. Like I said earlier, with the X-Men, that they're listening to Apocalypse and Mr. Sinister and Magneto. It's just weird.
I think part of the problem is you have these people, you've grown up in Western culture, but they don't even understand Western culture. No. They don't value it, and they put other cultures on an equal plane. So you go to these colleges where they say, well, all cultures are equal, and then you end up believing that, and you don't even understand the greatness that exists within your own culture. And so if you're writing comic books where you're essentially saying like, oh, well, if you have a Thanos who wants to be a megalomaniac and kill people like he's some sort of communist dictator, hundreds, it's okay. he just has a different point of view, and all everyone has their own take on things, and who am I to judge that sort of thing?
It's just a lot different because in the comic book, he's insane and he's murdering people. He's doing like all kinds of experiments on people. He's got these death ships and he's just wiping out planets. They completely changed it.
They missed a huge opportunity for not making Hela the stand-in for death, and that's who he would be courting throughout the two movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing about the MCU is pretty much all of the villains were pretty lousy. They were all goofs. They were sort of they weren't like something that you could really take seriously. You always kind of felt that they really didn't challenge the hero.
I think the only villain actually was Ultron, as far as villain that you could take kind of seriously.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of ironic that was, the only
The
villain
worst.
that was
one of the worst of the Avengers movies. Yeah.
Well, it's not just that. It's just that it's the one character that isn't really an actor behind it. I mean, yeah, sure, it was what's his name? Stoltz, Eric Stoltz.
James Spader.
No, James Spader.
Spader's right. I don't think Eric Stoltz. Anyway, James Spader did the voice, but there was not an actor, on the screen, and they just kind of had to construct the villain, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did with the Mandarin was just absolutely a crime.
Absolutely. So another thing I've noticed, obviously, is like with creators, there's definitely, and I'm supportive of this. I think we should have the more diverse array of creators. I would certainly like a more diverse political view of creators. I don't think we're getting that one, but I saw like a tweet recently where like there was an industry exec that he was like having to apologize for like, why don't you have more minority creators? Why don't you have more black creators in Marvel? And he came back, I have to apologize. 95% of our submissions are from white male creators.
Oh, that wasn't Marvel. That was a smaller publisher. I think it might have been. I don't remember.
But you know what I'm
one.
saying, right, Doc?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like why should they have to apologize? Like if those are the creators that are interested in writing for your company.
You blame they're blaming the outcome.
Their customers.
They're blaming the outcome on somebody that had absolutely no control over the input.
Yep.
You can't get pissed off when if there's all these other creators out there that are that are non-white men that are out there. Great, awesome, that's spectacular. Have them apply. If they don't apply, they can't get the effing job.
Yeah, the argument I had with that one chick just a couple of weeks ago, she's like, "Look at all the white men that are look at all the white men that are still in comics. Look at like, listen." I said, if you've got 50% of the applicants, say everybody's qualified that applies, 50% of the applicants are white males, and the other 50% are minorities or women. He goes, and you have all white males, that's a problem. I can see that as a problem. But if you have 19 of the applicants are white males and 1% are not, and they're not as good at actually writing because they haven't followed the stories their whole lives, who do you blame?
Yeah, if you get 20 applications and 19 of them are from white dudes, sorry, are you gonna pick the not white dude just because? No, you're just gonna pick whoever.
I think that's kind of the problem is that they do that, and so you have people like stunt casting creators. Yeah. So you bring in and you put Magdalene Visaggio on your comic, not a very good comic book writer, but you want a transgender representation in your product line, and you're forcing these people like a Max Visaggio on your customer base, and then they reject it, and it's their fault because they don't like the transgender creator. Because they're transgender, it's not because they weren't qualified to begin with, and you were just searching out a transgender creator. You weren't looking for the best creator for the title.
Yeah, it's like the one chick that she wanted to write Riri Williams because they had the same hair.
Well, it's Eve Ewing, and she did write Riri Williams. She turns out to be a pretty decent writer.
Yeah, she was actually better than.
She was better than the other,
Bendis.
but she still wasn't very good at it. But,
No, I mean she was bad, but it's a bad character. I mean, you can only do so much with a bad character. But yeah, no, it's an absurd situation.
But you put the creator in a terrible position to absolutely fall on their face and fail and get brutalized by your customer base because they probably shouldn't have been writing to begin with because they weren't ready.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but you're back to the same thing. You're blaming someone for an outcome when they have no control over the inputs. It's that simple. You can't get pissed off.
In comics, you basically have an entire army of creators out there that hate the vast majority of the customer base, and for no other reason than what they are, whether their race, their sex, or whatever. And you could feel it every time that you read the comics. It's no wonder that sales are in the toilet.
Yeah, they have a worldview where, like you're saying, whether it's the architecture where they want every building to look like some former Soviet bloc, sort of this bland sort of square with no creativity in it. They want everybody to be the same. So it's like, okay, well, if black people make up 20% of the population, they have to be 20% of the comic book writers. Nobody does that in any other field. So in basketball, you don't see people saying, well, Asians are 5% of the U.S. population, so we need to make sure that we have 5% Asian forwards on every single team, or with football, NFL football. You don't do that either. Nobody complains like, yeah, we need more Asian centers, and they should be on the Raiders and all this sort of stuff. And it's just like, no, sometimes in a world where people can utilize their free will to do whatever they want, you're going to have an inequality of outcomes, because it's not a bad thing. But to them, any inequality is a sign that there's something nefarious about it.
No, don't use inequality, because everything, it is perfectly equal. The difference is they want equity.
Yeah.
And equity is about equal outcomes. Equality is about equal inputs. That's equity is about equal outcomes. And that's where we've and you've seen that slow change. There's a lot of companies, a lot of civil rights groups. They have very quietly, very silently changed. Instead of it saying equality, they're now striving for equity, and that is a problem, because that is essentially communism.
Yeah,
you have equal outcomes regardless of input.
When I was in college, so I was an English major, like a lot of white guys in America or whatever. But then you go by the section where there was like all the engineering majors, and they were all Asian. Now, it's like, okay, well, if Asians are just flooding into the engineering department at the University of Southern California because that's what they want to do, or they've been raised that way by their parents, why is that a bad thing? If there's guys like me that want to get into creative writing or whatever, that's fine too. And so this idea that, I don't know, there should be more Asian writers at Marvel or something, well, it's like, well, like you said, if the pool doesn't exist, it doesn't exist, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, you see that in academics too, where history classes, when they start training teachers, it's predominantly male. And then with art education, it's predominantly female. So it's just one of the
with
things.
Nursing.
Yeah.
Go to nursing degree, predominantly female curriculum. But they don't say, we got to get the numbers up. We've got to be 50% men. They're like, no, it's a vocation,
I'll tell you.
Apparently more women like to do.
I'll give you a story. I was told that when I was doing my training, one of my teachers had told me that if you need a job, just let me know. Because I don't have any male teachers. All my teachers are female. So if you ever need a job, just come look at me. So it is out there. They just don't. I'm surprised you said that to me. But that is out there, especially in academics to a certain degree. Yeah,
if you kind of go back in history, back in the day when you had phones, they was like these switchboards or whatever. And when they first set them up, it was all men were the operators. And they ended up changing over time. Do you know why that is, Doug? I know you like history.
Because of the war, or
No. So they got the switch operators, and when people would call a place would call the police, like, "Hey, we have a fight on this street," the male operators would like be egging on the fight, and they wouldn't call the police. They wouldn't patch them over, and they found out that the women patch operators were more responsive to issues and made sure that emergency response got there faster.
Very interesting. Yeah, no, I didn't know that, but it's one of those things where, to me, just whether it's a gender thing or different races or culture or ethnicities, people gravitate to different fields for whatever reason. You obviously don't want there to be, you want to root out any sort of real racism or bias that should be illegal, those sorts of things. But if people just gravitate naturally for whatever reason to particular fields, there's no reason to freak out about that.
Absolutely. And Brian Ball here, obviously, friend of the channel, the writer of Rags, just a great dude all around. He says, I've noticed is that they really only like to pair black writers with black characters, Hispanic writers with Hispanic characters, gay writers with gay characters. And I think that really has done a disservice to a lot of minority characters over the years. If you notice that as well, comic book it's like, yeah, if we're going to write Iceman and he's gay now, we need to have a gay writer. If we're going to write, America Chavez, we need to have a Latinx writer that's also gay, but we don't have any of them in the house, so we got to go find one that we think wants to write comics, and then it turns out the character bombs because the person didn't know how to write comics to begin with.
Yeah, the one you go back to Eve Ewing, I know that there was a real struggle for her to write that first issue of Ironheart. I think it took her like almost a year because her style of writing is very different than that of a comic book. So if you're bringing in people that have look a certain way, and you want the character to be written by a certain ethnicity or background, and they don't know how to write a comic book, it's probably a real transition. I have a question for Doug Ernst on that regard. You've been a writer for a long time for the Washington Times. What was the transition like for you as a comic writer?
Yeah, that actually was pretty challenging, and Timothy Lim and Mark Pellegrini helped me out with that a lot. So the first script I wrote for Soul Finder Demons Match was more like a movie script, and they're like, okay, well, this is a good script. It's just closer to a movie, not really a comic book. You need to kind of work on that. And so I made changes, and they're like, cool, great. And then I gave them the second script for Black Tide that's coming out, and they're like, oh, wow, you got through the power curve. But there's still issues. And actually, I was talking to my wife about that last night because we were talking about the ending and her feelings on the ending. And actually, I was up like in the middle of the night thinking about it because I was like freaking out. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, now you have to write. I was writing for 56 pages. Could it have been 64? Could I have lengthened this particular scene? And so there's definitely a learning curve that you have to go through. And so it's like, okay, well, I just got to you have to just run with it. It's already, it's going to come out. I'm pretty happy with it, but there's always going to be things that you could tweak. And after every one, you just learn your lessons and hope to avoid making the same mistake twice.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's just so strange. And I think, like I said, it does a disservice to the writer, it does a disservice to the character. But but it's the backlash that they get that they can never understand. Doug, what's it going to take for not even just comic books or entertainment to actually listen to criticism? Do you think the pandemic is going to have a big deal to do with that? It feels like movies aren't being sold right now. A lot of these industries are probably losing money. They're probably not going to be able to chance risking much once they come out of it.
I was going to say it might be a matter of necessity in terms of respecting people. If they're the movie theaters are in dire straits because of the pandemic, and there's bankruptcies, and people have to essentially resort their finances and reorganize and all of that. And they're having all sorts of pains with pandemics. So yeah, you never really have the luxury to tell fans to take a hike as far as I'm concerned, but you really don't when you're in financial dire straits. So there might be a thing where, at least in the short run, some people have they might zip the lips more than usual, but the culture itself, I've said before, I don't like to be pessimistic, but the culture is in just such a place where I almost think there needs to be, I want there to be something horrible to happen, but some sort of unifying event, because people, especially with social media, they're in their own echo chambers, they're angry, vitriol is everywhere, and social media itself just seems to encourage this vicious cycle where people become more and more jaded. I don't know how you get out of it.
Well, I think that it's reaching a high pressure situation now, and what happens whenever you have a lid on a pot and the pressure builds to a certain point. The lid explodes and pops off there, and I don't know what's going to happen at that point. It's boogaloo, whatever they want to call it. It's not a good situation, and it's all happened because people just can't talk, and they refuse to talk at a certain point. So we were talking about how comics, you have different writers, like only black writers can write for black characters, only gay writers can write for gay characters. You also have the adverse, you have the reverse of that, where Christopher Priest wanted to write a Wolverine story. They wouldn't allow Christopher Priest because they kept wanting to put him on Black Panther, and they kept wanting to put him in black characters and stuff. He's like, I can write white characters, guys. I can do this. And they just never gave him that opportunity. They kept avoiding that opportunity with him. And that's racist. I'm sorry, it's just racist. And, they're going so far above and beyond to try to, make this completely inclusive environment to the point to where it's not inclusive. It's very specifically exclusive. And it's ugly.
Yeah, the balkanization of all these different entertainment industries in terms of saying, only women can write women, only minority can write minorities. At some point in time, I almost think like the pendulum has to shift back in the other direction, because it just gets harder and harder and harder to tell stories, and they just seem to be getting worse with each passing. Or there's always going to be good storytellers out there. There's always going to be the cream of the crop in terms of the artists. So you can find good books, but the problem is it just gets harder and harder. You're putting yourself behind the 8 ball needlessly for no reason. So I almost think at some point in time, there has to be a shift. And if there's not, then I guess game over.
So, Doug, I think you've also written a novel. You haven't released it yet, but I noticed that, like in book writing, what do they call them? They don't call them sympathy readers. They call them something else, where they're supposed to read your book from a certain perspective and ensure that there's nothing that could be taken offensive in your writing.
Oh yeah.
That book I need art for. So once I get some art, I'll eventually release it. But with novels, I mean, I think, how do I say it? I can only speak for myself, and that particular novel deals with different ideologies. And like I said earlier, I tried to treat liberalism and conservatism equally in terms of the seriousness that they deserve. And so there are characters that disagree quite a bit with one another.
Critical sensitivity reader. You can't get published without one, really.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really sad. I mean, do you think that Stephen King would have had that 90% of his books would have been published if it had critical sensitivity readers go through them? I mean,
there's no way I would ever. Yeah, I'll just self-publish before
you have to self-publish, but if you want to go through like Penguin or whatever.
Yeah, no, I totally forgot about that until I wasn't even thinking about it. But yeah, I've seen stories of that where they literally will hire people to go through and make sure that you're, the cultural appropriation, those sorts of things, you're not quote unquote guilty of that. And yeah, that's something where you'll probably never. There's a reason why the mainstream comic book industry don't like me, why people block me, and the same thing would be for big publishers. For the most part, is I'm just writing my stories, and if you like it, great, and if you don't, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna censor myself and put duct tape over my mouth because someone's concerned I might say the wrong thing. That's not going to
Think
happen.
about the disservice we're doing to society as a whole and just the culture. That voices, quality, talented voices, aren't allowed to be heard because they didn't want to have their works basically censored by other people who thought that what they were saying is offensive. It's okay to be offended every now and then, but we have basically a whole generation of younger people that think it's their right not to be offended ever. They think you're doing something illegal.
If you are a creative person at this point, my suggestion to everyone is to stay independent, stay indie. I mean, what Blake Northcott did with the North Valley Grimoire, her novel, was excellent. Nobody wanted it until they saw the money she was bringing in doing it independently. And then all of a sudden she started getting all kinds of calls. But you have to build yourself up independently to a point where you can, whenever Penguin or Random House or one of these other publishers calls you, or even if you're in comics, Marvel or DC or Image or whatever, and says we want to publish you, you say okay, cool, and in my contract I am guaranteeing no sensitivity reader. Yeah. And if you do one, you owe me $5 million. Make it some absurd dollar amount. You have to build your voice independently now in order to fight back against this, because it is just nothing but bullshit censorship.
What was that poor chick, that Chinese girl that wrote a book about her family, and it was about slavery in China. It's about slavery in China, and her family had suffered through slavery, and because there was a strange caste system or something like that, and they would not let her publish her book because it discussed slavery and she wasn't black.
Yeah,
I mean, what the hell?
We're kind of coming to the end of our kind of political correctness discussion about comic books. Obviously, we covered a wide gamut, not just about comic books, or not even just about political correctness, but I think we've had a pretty darn good discussion here. Comic Book Hut, is there anything else that you wanted to say as far as your opinion or something that you need to get off your chest before we wrap this up?
I want to thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody that's in the chat on the show and everybody that's left comments in the stream. I really appreciate it. And that's pretty much it. But it's been a good day, and I want to thank everybody for watching us today. That's pretty much all I have to say.
All right. Thank you very much. Pele, is there anything that you needed to say any last words about political correctness in comics before we wrap this bad boy up?
Yeah, just don't stop talking to each other. I mean, the whole problem that comes down to is when you stop communicating and you shut other people out and you shut out opposing views and stuff like that, you end up with that social balkanization, and nobody learns, nobody evolves or changes, and that's where we are now. It's how we've gotten ourselves into this. So,
absolutely. So, Doc, do you have anything else to say on the topic before we kind of start doing comic book recommendations?
Just remember that when you want to when you want to voice an opinion in a creative work, remind people that just try to remember that your job as a creator or an influencer or a whatever you want to consider yourself is to make people want to think, not tell them how to think. I think that's a big distinction that a lot of people have forgotten over the past 10, 15 years.
Absolutely. So, Doug, obviously, we love having you on the channel. It was great having Comic Book Hut. Is there anything else that you needed to chime in about, kind of political correctness and comic books, just in culture in general, before we kind of move on and recommend some comic books to the great viewers?
I really just want to thank you again for inviting me and basically having a place on the internet where you always have guests on who are very respectful, and you try to raise the bar in terms of the level of discourse. And so it's just kind of it's an honor to be invited. And I also want to say, in terms of the Hut, there was someone very early in the stream who was giving him a hard time, and I just think the Hut's taken the slings and arrows from every single direction, all political sides, all different sides of indie comics. And if you're getting flack from all different directions, then that's probably a sign that you're doing the right thing. In many instances, the internet needs people that just are not afraid to share their opinion and just say whatever the heck is on their mind, even if it's going to upset people. And so kudos to you for that. And again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Keep an eye on Iconic Comics in the future. We'll have Soul Finder Black Tide. We'll have an exclusive through them over the next couple months.
Sweet.
All right, so it's time to start recommending comics before we kind of go out on this one. I do want to say this to the viewers. If you have comics to recommend, put them in the chats. I'll throw them on the screen. There were so many big comics that came out this week, it's probably going to be hard to cover them all. Comic Book Hut, was there anything you read this week, that like a new comic that you just thought was great that you want to recommend? Or maybe it's something that you're looking forward to for next week?
Not really. The industry books are just sort of bland. I mean, I got some books the other day. I got Batman 100. The arc is great. I got Snake Eyes Game #2. I'm not a big fan of Rob Liefeld, but we'll see how that is. And I was surprised.
It's dope.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I was surprised to see that Amazing Spider-Man #49 is a double issue.
It's $8.50.
It's like a quadruple issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's good. I liked it.
I got the Bruce Timm cover.
Nice.
Got Mary Jane on it, and I got the Rise of Ultraman #2. I like the first issue on that, and I got something a little different. I got Legend of the Swamp Thing, and I got Thor. And the only reason I got Thor #8 is because Thor #9, I guess they're going to reintroduce Donald Blake, so I want to see how that story comes along. But if I want to recommend anything, check out Common America Volume 2 on Kickstarter.
Absolutely.
They have about 1,700 backers. And the first book was pretty good, and they're doing great work. And you need to check that out and look for that. And that's really my big recommendation. They have like 6 days left, I think, on that campaign. On Kickstarter, it's already done, so you don't have to wait for it.
Yep.
And they're great guys, Timothy Lim and Pellegrini. They're great guys. They've been on the show quite a few times over the past few months. But that is probably the #1 book I recommend. You'll get it in November. It's coming out in November.
Absolutely.
You get it in November.
It's a pre-order, people. The book is actually already printed. It's waiting to be shipped. They're just waiting for the final numbers. So there's absolutely no risk on that one. The books are done and just waiting to be shipped out. So definitely Common America Volume 2. Haley, what do you recommend in the shop this week?
I'm going to make a recommendation that's unusual. Deceased Planet. I love me some Deceased, and I want to suggest to everybody get that. I think it's digital only.
No.
So, it isn't? Okay.
No, Deceased End of the World. At World's End is digital.
That's right.
Deceased
that's
Dead
right.
Planet is
That's
Deceased.
right. That's right. I got too confused. But yeah, Deceased is fantastic. I still love Deceased. It's so funny that I rail on Tom Taylor regarding just about everything else that he writes, and but man, he can do some awesome zombie apocalyptic stories. So in that niche, he's pretty much the king of that small niche. So
Absolutely. All right, Doc, anything you recommended this week?
Oh, I got a couple of things. Wolverine #6 and X-Force #13. They're basically one story.
Absolutely, they're amazing.
So if you pick up one, pick up the other. They're both really dope. Amazing Spider-Man 850 was good. I enjoyed it. It was basically a quadruple issue.
I like it.
But it wasn't as big of a deal as I expected it for an anniversary issue. It was still really good. And Snake Eyes Dead Game #2 buy it. It's easily the best. I love it. G.I. Joe is right in Rob Liefeld's wheelhouse. It's great. It's really, really fun. So definitely pick that up. And finally, go buy trades of Invincible if you haven't already read it. Invincible, they dropped the trailer for the Amazon original cartoon series that looks absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
Wes and I will be talking about that soon. But yeah, definitely pick up those couple of books, and if you can go find some Invincible, go read it just to get ready for the cartoon, because it looks like it's going to be amazing.
Absolutely. So, Doug, is there any comics you're recommending this week?
I'm in a weird position because I did not get a chance to pick up ASM 850 this week, and like
It's
the last
good.
comic I did pick up was the Iron Man #1, and I'd give that an eh. I'll probably give that 3 issues.
I gave it like a marginal thumbs up.
Yeah, it was kind of like, okay, well, I would hold off. I'll give it 3 issues, and then if it's good, then I'll recommend it. But right now, I'm just on the fence with that one. But if you have cash to spare, I did pick up Marvel Team Up 141, going back in time. Spider-Man and Daredevil, Spidey in his black costume. I think it's tied for like the first appearance of the black costume. I'm not 100% sure, but I've been picking up a lot of back issues lately.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people have been doing that.
Yeah, that's been very popular. I mean, we always do well on back issues, but the last 2 weeks, our bargain bins have been absolutely hammered. So, it's been a lot of volume going out, a lot of volume.
So I do want to say this to promote the channel a little bit. After this at 5 p.m. Eastern time, my Amazing Spider-Man 850 review will be live with Perch. We're also going to be reviewing Spider-Man 50 next week. We should see the very first appearance of Kindred, or at least who the character actually is. That should be fun. Also got This Week in X-Men, where Doc and I are going to talk about Wolverine, X-Force, everything that was amazing about it. That'll be up live tomorrow. You're going to want to watch that. And we definitely crap all over Marauders, because that was not a very good comic book. Now, everybody kind of covered all the big comics I read this week except for one. So obviously Wolverine, X-Force, Deceased Dead Planet are 3 of the big ones. The other one that's in my top 4 this week is Bang #4. I think that was Boom. It's from Matt Kent, and I can't remember the artist right now, but it's really great if you like Die Hard and like 007 and spy characters all being kind of pushed into one narrative. It's a lot of fun, and I love issues 1, 2, and 4 have all been great. Issue 3 wasn't so great, but definitely if you haven't been reading Bang, it's awesome, and I think you'll all enjoy it. Thank you so much to the panel for joining us, or for joining me talking about this. I know it can be a difficult topic to talk about, not get yourself in trouble. There's all the censor out there waiting to jump on you. So thank you for talking about this, and thank you all to all the viewers. Obviously, the chats were amazing. Everybody was, for the most part, really respectful. Although there was one person that was hounding Comic Book Hut, but he handled it like a champ. He didn't fold under pressure, and I'm proud of you for that one. Salamat po, everybody.